Welcome to Module 5. In this module, we will look at a real-world company that uses design thinking, and we will also talk a little bit about market research and how it helps the design thinking process. We will discuss things that encourage innovation and things that can inhibit it. And then finally, we'll talk about disruptive innovation.
Welcome to Module 5. In this module, we're going to talk about design thinking at Apple, and then catalysts and destroyers of innovation. And this is based a lot on the readings this week in the Harvard Business Review book. And then we'll talk about disruptive innovation, and then we're going to take a look at some prototyping options. And before we talk about Apple, I think it's important for us to pause and think about market research and why it's so important, especially for a company like Apple that is so heavily involved in product innovation and has been seen as a fairly revolutionary company. And what's really important is to stay on top of changing customer expectations, needs, desires, and wants. And you're not going to do that unless you're engaged in market research, trying to find out what it is that the customer is wanting. Market research can also help quite a bit when you are trying to price your new product or service. So are you going to base your product or service on data that you've collected from customers, asking them what would you pay for this kind of a service or a product, or are you just going to guess at it? And later on in the course, we'll talk about market research from the perspective of web and social data. So this video is available in the module. I suggest you watch that first. It's a short video that talks about Apple and design thinking. Key takeaways from the Apple video include the focus on making an emotional connection with people, with customers. Also, there was this focus on making computers for people, for the average person, not the engineer, not the computer scientist, actually creating a computer that anyone could use. They also had a heavy focus on marketing. It was extremely important to their early success. And then also a focus on design, specifically simplicity. And then things didn't go well after Steve Jobs left. So Apple kind of went through this period of success at first, went through failure, then returned to success. And what the video points out as being reasons for that return to success was, again, kind of focusing on the things that were successful before, and simplicity being a key feature there, eliminating the number of product lines, going from 15 to 3, building a platform instead of building separate products. So there's the platform extends through all of the products that they offer. And then again, that focus on customer, and then also I think what's important to take out of there is this idea of continuous innovation, that you should never just be happy with the product or service that you have, that you know that there always is not just room to improve, but you have to improve, you have to change, because customer expectations are going to change. So with catalysts and destroyers of innovation, when we talk about catalyst of innovation, we could be talking about people, we could be talking about the environment, the culture within a business, anything that encourages innovation. And then we talk about destroyers of innovation. That could be the things, people, again, the culture that keep innovation from happening, that blocks innovation. So some of the things that could encourage innovation is that employees are not penalized if they fail when they're engaged in innovation or innovative process. Some innovative organizations will set aside one day a year where employees will just focus on coming up with new ideas, generating new ideas for new products and services. And quite often what can inspire innovation in an organization is leadership, inspirational leadership. I think Steve Jobs was an excellent example of that. Things that could block innovation, you could almost just take the opposite of what we just talked about with what encourages it, and do the opposite of that for what blocks innovation. Being heavily penalized when you fail, not providing any resources, being too focused on the short term, being too focused on short-term financials especially. Those are things that can block innovation. What is disruptive innovation? There are a couple of videos in the module that you should take a look at, short ones that do a good job of describing disruptive innovation. But essentially, disruptive innovation is on the far end of the scale. So if we were to look at one side, And when we take the iPhone, for instance, when we go from one generation of iPhone to the next, especially within those generations when they come out, in between major product releases, and they're just doing little tweaks, doing little changes, adjustments. They're not revolutionizing anything. They're not turning the industry upside down with an incredible new idea. They're just making tweaks, small improvements, minor innovations. Disruptive innovation is on the total other end of that. Some people would say that Tesla is a classic example of disruptive innovation. Even though the idea of an electric car has been around for a very long time, and there have been many electric cars before Tesla came out. But the approach, the way they did it, and the timing, and the technology, and I would also say the focus on design. There are so many things about Tesla, their business model being very different than other car makers, that they often are looked at as being an example of a disruptive innovation. They are in the process of forcing, through their success, other car manufacturers to get into the electric market, because Tesla has been driving, basically, changing customer expectations. So one way to think about disruptive innovations is turning an industry upside down, making all the competitors have to change course. Some other examples of disruptive innovation. One of the videos talks about the Toyota and Lexus being one of those disruptive innovations, and this gets onto the notion of Lexus is a part of Toyota, but it's the luxury end of it. So this notion of we're going to split off a luxury car, the luxury car part of our company. Wikipedia versus traditional encyclopedias. Before Wikipedia and the internet were around, if you wanted to look up information at home, you generally had to go to an encyclopedia, which was multiple volumes. It took up one or two shelves on a bookshelf. And so that's an example of a major disruptive innovation. The idea of mainframe computing versus distributed computing. So mainframe computing, back in the old days of computers, you had one powerful computer, and then as a user, you would have what they would call a dumb terminal, which was essentially just a monitor. And so you just use the computer power of the mainframe versus what we have now, which is you have extremely powerful devices. But we're kind of going back to that with cloud computing, kind of another shift here, where we're now kind of shifting resources back into this kind of, I guess you could say, an idea of a mainframe. So we're seeing some back and forths there, but the idea of being able to have that kind of computing power within our hands has been a very disruptive innovation. We can talk about Amazon on many levels being disruptive, whether it's the introduction of the Kindle, whether it's those specific Fire devices that they offer, the business model itself, and even just from an e-commerce perspective, they've really turned multiple industries upside down. And now as they enter into grocery, that could be a whole nother area. So when we look at the bigger picture here, how would we describe what's happening in this next wave of technological change and innovation? Just to me, it seems as being very heavily driven by data, and that's something that's been happening for a few years now. I think the pandemic has even further pushed not only the need but also the availability of all kinds of data about customers, about users. And this is why I also talk so much about marketing in this course, specifically digital marketing, because I think innovation and digital marketing go hand in hand, and then the data that wraps around all of that. So we start thinking about what effect all this has on small businesses. Again, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of this stuff. When I talked about this prior to the pandemic, it was a little bit more difficult to see how certain small businesses might make use of these new technologies, of being online, of delivery services and so forth. Fast forward to after this pandemic period, and we have a total different perspective on this. And absolutely, there are very few businesses that could do without this stuff now and still survive. So it leads us to the next question. What's the next company or industry that's going to be turned upside down or become extinct? Some people have even said that higher education, it's time for that industry to be disrupted. And I know that technology will certainly lead the way if that is something that's going to be happening, as well as customer expectations or student expectations. So let's transition over to prototyping. And for the final project, you have many different things that you could do in terms of creating your prototype. I'm just going to show you a couple of things here. So if you're interested in doing a product, or a prototype of a product, a tangible product, there are a few different directions you could take. In following weeks' modules, we'll talk about how you would prototype for services, how you might prototype for processes. So this week we're just talking about how you might go about prototyping here. And there is a separate, if you go to Module 10, there's a prototyping presentation there that can also provide some more information for you. Tinkercad.com is a really neat, easy to use online CAD app. It is there is a slight learning curve, but it's very fun to use, and it's not like any other CAD software that if you have used it, you probably have never used anything. If you have used CAD software, I'm sure you've never used anything this simple. And so it's really easy. We've had several students actually put something together using Tinkercad. You could also go to Thingiverse.com, and they have a whole ton of 3D models. And there might be something there that you think would be helpful in your product prototyping. And if you didn't want to use these technologies, you could draw something by hand. In this class, I'm more interested in going through the process and seeing your ideas compared to using specific tools to get you there. So this is something that was created in Tinkercad by a student for this project. And a lot of this stuff, you might think, wow, there's a lot of detail. Well, a lot of these things are pre-built, so you can start with pre-built models. In this case, the product that the customer or the student had created these were mobile charging stations. And so we see the three large things here. This was their first prototype, first round of prototyping. And so what they were envisioning was an area. So this is not just a product innovation. Really, they're talking about some process stuff too. Seating areas to wait while your phone charges. And they had some plants here just to add some decor. For their second prototype, they made it much more functional. And what's interesting is the idea initially was a product innovation, being these mobile charging stations. But what ended up, the real innovation is, wait, let's actually create an environment here that people may want to stay at, and not where in the first design it's more like a waiting room. Here, there's more function. There's entertainment happening. These are big screen TVs. So again, even when you're doing a product prototype, you might find yourself bleeding over into some other area of innovation. So it was real exciting to see this one. This is not meant to be a full tutorial of Tinkercad, but just wanted to give you a quick overview so you can see how simple to use it is. So in that one student example, now it takes a little bit of getting used to. I'm using the right mouse button, and when you click and hold, it lets you rotate your workpiece. If you left click, that's how you could select items that would be in your in the plane here. There are also many YouTube tutorials, by the way. So if you wanted to add a wall like the one student had in the example, you click on, you could do it several ways. I'm going to start with a box, place it where you want it, and you can be as accurate with your specifications, or if you just want to ballpark things, that's fine too. And so here's how I just made a wall. And this one doesn't have the texture on it, but that's perfectly fine, depending on what you're trying to do. And one thing I will show you is you can make shapes by combining multiple shapes. So I'm going to add a box. Let's make it a little bit bigger, make it taller. And then I'm going to select these gray cylinders will make holes that are that shape in whatever solid object they're placed into. So if I want to add a hole to this box, I'm adding this grayed out cylinder like that, and then I need to select those two items, and then I'm going to click this option here that says group, and then what it did is it took the cylinder and cut a hole in that block. So that's a real simple way to manipulate these items. If you take a look, you have several basic shapes. You can add text, but even beyond these ones that are available, these basic shapes, you have a lot of other options. There's even a shape library. So many different things to choose from. Let's say you were designing something you wanted to 3D print, and just for the sake of simplicity, let's say it was this little box with the hole in it that we made, and I'm going to get rid of the wall. And let's say you wanted to get this 3D printed, which again I can do 3D printing. If you'd like, just let me know. And when you're ready to move it on, either let me know and then I can help you, walk you through this process step by step. Or you can go to export, and then what you want to export, and then you could email it to me, is the STL. And the STL file is then something I can take into an application. We can do what's called slicing, and then we can export it so that it can be 3D printed.